let us begin. And I have another such account for you. I bought this one in Bordeaux, and it tells of a story along the west coast of France, where the mighty Atlantic breaks and breaks and breaks again on the Isle de Ré and the Isle de Noir. It's a sad story, and one that I have make me question what I thought I knew about what it was to be human at all, and what it was to be a vampire, perhaps, at the last. See what you make of it. Now, they tell me that I am guilty. The trial is done. My fate is sealed. The Widowmaker awaits. Guilty for shooting my best friend, poor Pierre, there in the jail. But I do not feel guilty. Perhaps mad. But then there was that thing upon the doorstep, and the note, that not even the gendarmes could explain. They merely ignored. And I know what I know. And as the voice whispers to me again and again and again, as it waits to go in the grave, for I'm sure they have not burnt it yet. I'm sure of it. Perhaps me losing my head is the best outcome. For then we know the line is stopped once and for all. But where to begin? I knew Pierre, a man who rejoiced in the name of Pierre le Père. Long years, 2 years younger than me, but much cleverer. He was my contemporary for 5 years in college and lycée. 2 years above his time, you see. And he needed a champion back in those days. A small, precious lad, one who didn't get out enough and never played sports, with a hat that might have well said "Bully Me" written upon it. And so I was always his protector. Well, we, the sons of the sea, the fisher folk, we know how to look after a young chap who needs it. And so I did. And so I have always done. All through college, all through lycée, him and me. He being the brains, suggesting how to do the homework, and me always the brawn. And then we left, and I got enough to go to the local university on the Isle de Ré itself. But Pierre could have gone to the Sorbonne, so good with his grades. But he was idle. He didn't much want to leave his parents, and they desperately didn't want him to leave. So he went to the university with me, there on the Red Isle. Not a great university, but you could scramble an education. And he studied also courses in Bordeaux, I heard. He always had an ankling to join the Bohemian set of the university, for it was an old art college, as well as an agricultural college that had been united some 20 years before, and had both sets of masters still within it. So while he studied philosophy, and occult philosophy I think, and theology in Bordeaux, he studied art with me in the Isle de Ré, and I studied fishing and farming and all those things. And all that time, he never looked at a woman, I think. He was too shy. But his studies took him to odd places. I remember seeing him read the Malefictus Malefictum in the library. and there wasn't a single occult book in that library that had many occult books. For 500 years ago or less, it was right in the centre of the craze. The witch craze, I mean. For the Huguenots, burned far more than Catholics ever did. And he would read me of their accounts, and his eyes would go wild. And I told him to keep his sanity safe. Well, when we left university, I took on my father's business, fishing. I've worked at it since. We were a prosperous family. We did well. Had 5 boats. In our little community there on the harbour, amongst the fisher folk, we had our reputation. And Pierre went back to live with his parents on the mainland, on the little town I could see. And often I would take my boat over and see him, and often, particularly in clement nights, he would come across the causeway, and we'd always know it was him, because he would knock twice loud, once quiet, twice loud. Pierre's rap, we called it. And he would come in, I remember. 5 years after university, he would have been 27 then. He entered into a correspondence course with writers in England. They called him the French Lord Byron, for he was a master crafter of poems and rhyme in English and in French, and could flow between the languages. And you would listen to his words and they would sweep you along, rich in the symbolism of the occult, and somehow speaking to something quiet in human souls. Well, the years passed. My father died. I married and had a son who I called Pierre and made him the godfather. And he laughed and said it was the nearest he'd get to having a child. And I asked him why he did not marry. And he said nothing, but looked into the fire. It was the year after his mother died. He seemed to have settled down into a fat, stout middle-aged, much before I had. When he met her, Esme. He used to go back to the university to hold courses in writing. And that was where he met Esme St. Just. Yes, one of those St. Justs. Some relative, great-great-great-uncle or something, had led to terror. And all the family, it was said, were touched, either by reason or madness, or both. Her father was Thomas Le Père, he the terror of the little hamlet of Le Croix, that you can see still, although it is now ruins on the bay. He was the last generation that lived there, just after the war, when the fishing dried up and the oyster beds were polluted, and nobody could quite explain why, for on our side of the bay everything was as rich as before, and all the fishermen came to our side in the end, and only Pierre St. Just stayed there, in the great house, some sort of Baroque masterpiece that had always been his. Where he found her in old age, no one knew. There were whispers that he found her in the ocean, that no longer produced fish, that she smelt always of fish. That wife he found, with her great goggling eyes and silver skin. I remember her well, she looked so ill. I would have been a young lad and I only saw them together once, riding down through our town to the headland. Well, she stayed with him 3-4 years, and then she left. He said she'd gone back to her people, but he had a daughter, Esme, and he and his 2 servants brought up Esme who he was going to educate according to his whim. She grew up. She was beautiful, with wild staring eyes perhaps, and small and petite, with a slight silver cast to her skin, and her mother's slight propensity to form her mouth in a circle, but her face was sharp and lovely. I remember noticing her when she was quite 17. Soon after, she grew ill. It was said that she had some sort of flu, and the flu spread to her father, and her father seemed to die. No, he did die, for we buried a body with him in it, I suppose. And after her father's death, those who knew Esme said she changed. Before, she had always been a fine scholar, but indecisive, anxious, nervous, always looking behind her, as if she was wondering who was listening. And before the flu had struck her, men said that she had got more and more resigned, and had treated the disease when it came as if it was her end. But when she came back, she was decisive, full of the vigour of her father, as if his death somehow had vitalised her, and she was her own woman. She held great literary parties in her mighty house, and that was where she first met Pierre, after his writing group. For she attended that first, and invited him to her parties, and soon he became a fixture, the resident poet, no doubt. When they were engaged and he brought her round, I couldn't pretend to be delighted. I asked them where they would live, and Pierre said his father was giving him the other house, the one his mother had once lived in, before they married. I knew it well, her ramshackle place. And Esme was full of designs about how she would change it, how she was delighted to leave her little hamlet, now it had gone to rack and to ruin, and how she would join the town of Pierre and become part of its social life. Now she was a Madame Le Père. They disappeared on honeymoon, some said. Where they went, I was never quite sure. I know they went and visited Esme's house one last time to get, she said, the gear she needed. That was just before it fell in and the roof fell down. After that, I lost track. He didn't send me a card. He came back 3 weeks later. Men said they came back with a lot of stuff, and there was a whisper they had visited the very west end of France, beyond Brest, on the Cap de Chèvre. And there they had called up the storm. And the storm had come. But I didn't listen to such fisher folk. Really, I didn't. Why would I? Fisher folk, I tell you, are always full of dreams. Never know quite what they say. That they didn't like Pierre, I knew. And that they loathed Esme. They told me often enough. But he would come. He'd come visiting us from time to time. Always the same knock upon the door. And we would make him so welcome. As my son scrambled through his education, and Pierre did his best to educate him better. They had been married about 4 years when the changes started to happen. I noticed it when I was visiting town, and I saw Pierre driving their great cat, their great Land Rover, I think, fast down the road. But he didn't look or wave at me. He just drove on, and there was a strange look in his eye. By this point I hadn't seen him for about 2 months. And I asked around, and men said yes, often now he was driving. Well, I never knew he passed his test. And they said he would drive far. And when he came back, he was tired and exhausted, so tired he often had to hire chauffeurs. I wondered then, how Esme was doing, there in their house. And I told my wife, and she said we should visit her. When Pierre was away, it was only the act of a friend. So we went. I remember knocking on the door, but there was no answer. Only a face for a moment. From a room right at the top of the house. I had never been invited in. Well, no, not shown the main house at any rate. There seemed to be Esme's, but looked at us in fear and caution. Well, this went on for a few months. Once in a way, Pierre would come. He did after he came back from that trip, and he was tired and exhausted. He always seemed to be wanting to tell us something, but he could never get it out. It was like his tongue was frozen in his mouth, just as he was starting to say it, and he would change the topic or allude to it. And there was often a wild look in his eyes of a slave. And then I got a call. It was from the mayor of a little town in the Ariège, Massat, that had found my friend Pierre wandering in the woods, cold and alone, and unable, it seemed, to drive the cat that was his in the Mairie car park. And he had given them my name, and said I was a friend and I would vouch for him. And it is true, I would. I took the train down to the little town, in the middle of a gorge, it seemed, miles away from the sea. And there was Pierre, utterly exhausted. Well, I decided to take the journey back in easy stages. We drove up to the nearest big town, and there I gave him coffee and croissant, and he began to revive. She said it wouldn't happen. She said she would never do that. And I looked at him and said, who said? Esme, he whispered. Esme. Do what? And then he would say nothing. Nothing, he said, until we were driving. But my soul is harder to find. We drove north then, after I left the town, looking for the motorway, which was further than I thought. And when we hit it, suddenly he turned to me and started to talk. She borrows my body, you know. Did you know minds move if you know how to do it? There are spells, old wild spells that you would not believe, that allow you to change in where you are, in whose mind you are, what you are, but remain you. Oh, she knows them all. But is it her at all? Did she die a long time ago? I once saw Thomas's writing, you know. I cannot tell you what. I cannot. Will you help me? And he turned to me and he looked. But just at that moment, his eyes blinked. And it was as if somebody else was staring at me, decisive. And my friend Pierre said, you must be tired after your driving. Let me show you where the motorway was. And he had me pull over on a lay-by. And sure enough, he knew exactly the way home. And he drove me all the way back, saying thank you when I dropped him off. And I looked up at the house as I left, and at the topmost window I saw Esme, and she was crying her eyes out. Well, the rumour spread through the town that my friend Pierre had turned into a domestic tyrant. for Esme's crying face had been seen not just when I returned, but for a few hours before. And so but the next day Esme laid the legend low, because she came back into the town very much herself and told everybody that she had had a friend staying, but her friend had had bad news. And that news was that her mother was dead, and so that she, who had looked upon that woman as her own mother, had sobbed and been so sad. Many believed her, but many noticed she did not name the friend at all, and some did not believe it. And then the strange thing happened. It was 2 days after, when suddenly there was a knock upon the door, a single knock, and we opened it, and much to my shock, there was Pierre. But it was Pierre of the decisive eyes, cold eyes I seemed to know before. And he came in and he thanked me very much for rescuing him and hoped I hadn't inconvenienced, and insisted that he paid for the fuel. And then he was gone. He had driven to see us, would you believe, and drove home. My wife noted how he had changed, become thinner, leaner, more muscular, and muttered marriage must agree with him, and looked at me. Well, I had another glass of wine and wondered at it. That was a year ago, yes. And from that time on, I never really saw Pierre. Not until the last month. He was either driving off in his decisive mode or at home, and sometimes you would look up and see his little wan face. I remember once he waved, but something seemed to jerk him back. I was worried for him. So worried I wondered what dark spells he was getting into. I remember I went so far as to go into the University of the Isle de Ré and pulled down one of the books I knew he had studied best and hardest, for his name was in the register. His and Esme's had read it. And no wonder, it was a book that was written by the guru, the master of her father, Thomas. I remember it said, there is a charm that works best in the spring, by which a soul makes change. Plato knew it, Plotinus knew it, I know it, the ritual of the transmigration of souls, be they dead or alive. And then there was a second work on hypnosis, and how you could be hypnotized from afar. I remember I told my wife that this was what they were reading, and she smiled and said, well, that figures, doesn't it? Esme's always been interested in hypnosis. And she told a story that she had heard from a woman who she had cleaned with, who had gone to school with Esme, a posh school, and that Esme always seemed to know more than anyone else. Seemed to have the mind sometimes of a grown man, although she was only 15. Of how sometimes she would perform a trick upon other girls, and she would say, exchange their souls. And they would see from Esme's eyes, while she would take out their body and use it for a while, and bring it back faithfully. How at the end of such exchanges, she would always have a blank moment, and when she came back, she would look somehow different, sadder, and barely remember what she had done. It was a strange story, and my wife told it to me garbled like I've told it to you, as if she couldn't even begin to think its truth. And then it happened, a month ago, February. There was suddenly a loud knock upon the door. But it was not a single knock. It was a double, a quiet, and then a very loud single. It was Pierre's rap. I opened the door, delighted to see him, for as I said, I had not seen him now in a very long time, and he looked askance. His eyes grew wild, and he said, "She's left me. Esme's left me. Thank God. She was trying to eat my soul. She was trying to eat my soul. She had me. She had me in her grasp. Her mind in my mind. Her body in my body became my body, so that I did not know which way to go. I did not know. And when I was in my own body, she would listen to all I said and cut my words off, hypnotizing me from afar. Oh, it's been vile. Vile, I cannot describe how terrible it has been. I gave him brandy and laid him to bed, and he stayed that night with us. And then the next morning he woke up and he said, "She's gone. I had a trick or two. I had a trick or two. I did. A charm she did not know, a spell I had read. And when she was going to take me a candle mass and devour my soul. Before that, I uttered my charm and my spell. I sent her back into her body. She cannot escape that body now, and I am free. Free, I tell you. No more masses by the goat. Oh, she used to take me to the wilds, to the far-off mountains, and I would wake up, and I was all painted red, and I knew what had happened. She had used my body for some spell, some magic power that she said she needed it for. She. There was no she. I once saw her writing and compared it with her father's. They were the same. Esme died a long time ago. It is... And then he broke off, as he had before, and could only whisper, "L. Say L. It is her." Well, he stayed with me a week, by the end of which time he seemed much, much better. Now his father, I had forgotten to add in all the sadness of the tale, had died 3 years before, and he decided that now he was going to move out of the house he had shared with Esme and go back to his father's house, but that he had to sort out a few things first in the old house. I tried to gainsay him, but he was adamant. He would not move until he was ready. But when he was moved, I would see a great change in him. He would take me on a trip to England if I liked. He would do the speaking, and we would go and read poetry. He would take my son, Pierre, now 16, and teach him another culture and another language. I was delighted to see him change, and so was my wife. But our hearts betrayed us when he went back to the old house. At first, for a week or so, it seemed all well as well. And then at the end of the week, I got another call from the gendarmes, calling me. It was Pierre, and Pierre said that I was the only one that he would trust, and he wanted to tell me something. Something I needed to know. So I went to see him. They had him prior to taking him to the local asylum, there in a cell. And he looked at me and said, "He's whispering in that eye, whispering I might have killed her, but he has come back. He said he could, that his powers defy as long the flesh is there, defy the power of death itself until the body rots. He's after me, this Candlemas, he'll take me. And then Pierre started to scream and to shout, and all the dogs barked. And they took him off to the asylum. He was there 3 days, and it had gone past Candlemas, the beginning of February, when I got a note saying that Pierre wanted to see me. And I rode off to the asylum, and standing in the asylum, there was a man, certain of eye, decisive, with the air of Thomas. And he looked at me and said, "I have recovered. I am normal now. Everybody agrees I'm not mad. They will release me tomorrow, as long as I can prove my cognitive tests. Thank you for all your support and all your help, my friend." And he shook me by the hand, and his grip was not Pierre's. I came home. I didn't know what to do. I stayed up and drank, as I often did when I didn't know. Some time after my wife had gone to bed, perhaps 12:30, the phone rang, and I picked it up, and I just heard a sound. And then nothing else. Well, I put it down, sure. And I waited. I drank some more. Something told me something was coming. It was perhaps half an hour later, 1:00, when there was a knock on the door. 2 loud, 1 short, 1 loud. And I opened the door. Oof! And it fell out. Fell in. A dead, stagnant thing. It had once been a woman's body, but now its skull was showing, and the back of the skull was caved in. Eyes looked at me once as they fell, beseeching, as if they were still living. And I looked at the stagnant mass, and I saw that in its hand it held a notepaper, written with a stub of pen, and on that was such a note. "This is the last confession of Pierre Le Père," it said. "I killed Esme, stoved her head in, as a way to stop her taking over my soul, for she meant to. She meant to. I tell you she did. At Candlemas she said she would. So I stoved her head in, buried her, deep in the cellar where none could find her. Put such charms on her that I thought I was safe. I thought I was safe! But she had other charms, spells I did not know. She was a follower of charms so ancient that nothing can bind them fast. And so she's whispered in my mind, and I know she was growing. I tried to take myself to the asylum, but there is no peace. And then today, the ultimate horror. I woke up in her body once again, dead, deep in the cellar, buried. I woke up, but I remembered what I once had read. The soul lingers for a month in the body ere it dies and passes on. And a month hadn't gone past since Esme was dead, so here I was, her soul lingering. So with a fierce determination I've never felt before, I dug with what was left of my hands, coming out at last, and I shall take this confession of guilt to my only friend, and ask, whatever the cost, he shoots that thing that is calling itself me, that was Thomas, to stop it becoming a curse for all men. Now, when I read that, I don't know what you would have done. I know what I did. I took out my old father's service revolver. I loaded all its chambers. I went to the asylum to see the friend who was there, and I shot him with all barrels in the head, hoping to splatter his brains so that no soul could stay. But with what result? Although the police saw the note and saw the disease thing on my doorstep, and even saw the strange evidence of something digging itself out in the cellar of Pierre's house, the salient fact was that I had killed him. They didn't need any more facts. And so I stood on trial for my life, and my single defence was hooted out. And so it is, and so I am. But always I hear him muttering. For I shot him in the brains, but they did not burn his body. They say they need it for further tests, just to find out something. And so the body lies in the morgue, and in it lies Thomas's soul. And it reaches out to me. It reaches out. And I think it would take over me. I think it would. For I cannot fight it for too much longer. It would be an irony, wouldn't it, if I let it win for a moment, as the blade tomorrow swings. lose my head to the Widowmaker. Justice at last. And so the journal rings and finishes with just a note that the writer was indeed executed the next day. And it was strange that as the blade swung down, men could have sworn another face looked out from his. When I read it, it much moved me, and I cannot quite forget it, for I thought I knew what it was to be a human.